Okay, so when we talk about mixed numbers, let's just do a little vocabulary review. When we talk about mixed numbers, this means that we have a whole number and a fraction. And so if we're looking at a number line and these mixed numbers, they come between the whole numbers on a number line because it's a whole number and a fraction or a fractional part. So these come between the whole numbers on a number line. So 1.5 would be right about there. So whole numbers, mixed numbers, improper fractions, those are also called fractions greater than 1. Those come between the two or between two whole numbers on a number. So in our lesson today, we're going to be multiplying mixed numbers by whole numbers. So let's just first look to see what this looks like. Let's visualize this. So we're presented with a problem. It says there are 6 students in each group. Each student works 1.5 hours on a group project. What is the total amount of time they spend working on the project? Okay, so you can see here we have one student who's worked 1.5 hours. Here's another student who's worked 1.5 hours. Another student, and this goes all the way up until we have 6 students who have worked 1.5 hours. And you can see the model of one whole and then half. So 6 groups of 1 1/2. Well, if we look at this, we can see that we're actually multiplying 6 times 3 halves because in one whole, there are 2 halves. And so in 1.5, written as an improper fraction would be 3 halves. So we can really say 6 times 3 halves. And we know that when we multiply a whole number times a fraction, we just need to put that whole number over 1, and then we can multiply. So 6 times 3 is 18, 1 times 2 is 2, and 18 divided by 2 is 9. So we actually have 9 groups of 1 when we combine them all together. And so we could say that the group works on the project for a total of 9 hours. Now, just to go back and clarify where we get 9 groups of 1. So if we take each of these halves now, right? We said, let's change 1 1/2 into 3 halves. We made that into an improper fraction. Well, let's combine now to see how many wholes we have. So we have 1. Oh, no. Let me grab my pen here. There we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We combine these 2 halves and get 7, these 2 halves and get 8, these 2 halves and get 9. And so that's how we get 9 groups of 1. And so we know that the group works on the project for a total of 9 hours. Now that we've seen what this looks like visually, what 6 groups of 1.5 looks like and how we can use a visual model to help us solve, let's look at method 2. And this is using more of a standard algorithm to solve. So method 2, we still have our problem 1.5 times 6. Well, the first thing we want to do whenever we have a mixed number is to change the mixed number into an improper fraction. And so to do that, there's a couple of ways of thinking through it. So let's just do a little review. If we have 1 1/2, we could change that whole into 2 halves and simply add it to the half that's there. That gives us 3 halves, okay? Remember, any number over the same number is 1 whole. So we didn't change its value. We just exchanged the 1 whole for the fraction 2 over 2. If we add that to the half that's there, we get the improper fraction of 3 halves. Another way of thinking through this is 1 1/2 is to take the whole number times the denominator, plus the numerator. So it would be 1 times 2 is 2, plus 1 is 3, and we put that all over 2, which was our original denominator. Okay. So let's try one more just to make sure we have down how to turn a mixed number into an improper fraction. So if we had 2 and 1/4, will you change that into an improper fraction? Okay, so there were 2 different ways of doing it. You might change that 2 into 4/4 plus 4/4 plus 1/4, because we know 4 over 4 is 1 whole, 4 over 4 is 1 whole. It's kind of a funny one, but picture it. So we just took the value of the 2 and changed it into fractions that are 1 whole. And then let's add that fourth into it. So 4/4 plus 4/4 plus 1/4 is 9/4. Now the other way you could think about it is by multiplying the whole number times the denominator. We get 8, plus 1 is 9. So that's our numerator. And the denominator is 4, so 9/4. Okay, so now that we did a little review on changing mixed numbers into improper fractions, let's carry on down here and solve 1 1/2 times 6. So we have 3 halves times 6. If we put 6 over 1, we can multiply 3 times 6 is 18, and 2 times 1 is 2, and 18 divided by 2 is 9. So the group project worked for a total of 9 hours. Let's look at this next problem. It says find the product of 2 1/3 and 5. Now remember that in math, product means to multiply. So we're going to be multiplying. And so it's like thinking about 5 groups of 2 1/3. So here's one group of 2 1/3. You can see here are 2 wholes. And if I divide my last whole into thirds, here's my 1/3. So there's one group of 2 1/3, 2 groups of 2 1/3, 3 groups of 2 1/3, 4 groups of 2 1/3, and 5 groups of 2 1/3. So now we want to change that improper fraction into a mixed number. And so what is happening is we're actually taking those, we're actually taking the wholes and we're turning them into thirds. So now we have 3/3 plus 3/3 plus 1/3. And that gives us 7/3. So now we have, or we're going to say 5 groups of 7/3. There's my 5 groups of 7/3. And when we have 5 groups of 7/3, that gives us 35 thirds. If you put the whole number over 1 and multiply, numerator times numerator is 35. Denominator times denominator is 3. So 35 thirds. The last step then is to change 35 thirds into a mixed number. So 3 goes into 3 once. Subtract, I have nothing left over. Bring down my 5. 1 times 3 is 3. Subtract, I get 2 left over. So the leftover part becomes my numerator, and my divisor becomes my denominator. So we would get 11 2/3. Let's look at solving 2 1/3 times 5, just using the standard algorithm now. If we weren't going to draw a model and look at a model, how would we solve this just using a standard algorithm? Well, step 1 is to turn the mixed number into an improper fraction. So go ahead and do that. right, I hope you got 7/3 because 2 times 3 is 6 plus 1 is 7. So 7/3. Or you could change that 2 into 3/3 plus 3/3 plus 1/3 gives us 7/3. And now that we have an improper fraction, we're ready to multiply. So 5 times 7 is 35, 3 times 1 is 3, and of course, when we divide 35 by 3, we get 11 2/3. The next problem says 1 1/2 times 3. I want you to just take a minute and study the model and see what you notice. Okay, did you notice that there were 3 groups of 1 1/2? Why didn't we say 1 1/2 groups of 3? Remember how in multiplication we can switch our factors around? We're still going to get the same product. So in this case, it makes sense to look at 3 groups of 1 1/2. So here's one group of 1 1/2, 2 groups of 1 1/2, and here's that third group of 1 1/2. Now, you may have noticed that they changed the mixed number into an improper fraction. And to do that, they're taking the whole and dividing it into halves. And we already had another half over here, so we end up with 1/2, 2 halves, 3 halves. So now we have 3 groups of 3 halves. And so when we combine those halves together, I get 1, 2, 3. These halves together give me 4, and then I still have 1 half left over. So I'm thinking my product's going to be 4 1/2, which this model shows. And now I want to challenge you to just multiply 1 1/2 times 3 using the standard algorithm. And then you can pause your video and check back to see if your thinking matches mine. All right, first step was to turn the mixed number into an improper fraction. So 1 times 2 is 2, plus 1 is 3, so I get 3 halves times 3. I need to put the whole number over 1 so that I can multiply. 3 times 3 is 9, 2 times 1 is 2, so I get 9 halves, and 9 divided by 2 would be 4, and the leftover part becomes our numerator, and the divisor becomes our denominator. So 4 1/2 is the product, 4 1/2 is the product of 1/2 times 3, or 3 groups of 1 1/2. All right, why don't you try this one on your own, pause and check back to see if your thinking matches mine. The problem is 2 1/3 times 2. Go ahead and study the model and see how that might help you to solve the problem. But you can also use the standard algorithm to find the product as well. All right, let's check in with each other. So you may have noticed that we had 2 groups of 2 1/3. There are my 2 groups of 2 1/3. And so in order to turn that mixed number into an improper fraction, we took each whole and we divided it into, it's kind of hard to see, let's change it to blue. We divided it into thirds. So there's 3/3. Here's another 3/3. And then we would have had one more third, right? And that would have been one group of 2 1/3. Then we'd have another 3/3 and another 3/3 and another third. This is our second group of 2 1/3. And so how many thirds do we have total? Well, we had 3, 6, 9, 12, 14 thirds, which gives us, let's look at the wholes, 1, 2, 3, 4. We had four holes and then 2 thirds. Now let's look at what this looked like as the standard algorithm, using the standard algorithm. First, we need to turn that mixed number into an improper fraction. So hopefully you got 7/3 times 2. When we're multiplying by the whole number, we need to put it over 1. And then we can multiply. Numerator times numerator is 14. Denominator times denominator is 3. And so 14 divided by 3 is 4, with 2 left over. The leftover part becomes my numerator, and the divisor becomes my denominator. So 4 2/3. The same product we got when we were looking at it. So let's just review. In this lesson, we talked about multiplying mixed numbers times whole numbers. And the process for solving this is to first turn the mixed number into an improper fraction. And so you can see we've taken 2 1/3 and changed that into the improper fraction of 7/3. Next, we need to take the whole number and change the whole number into a fraction by placing it over 1. And then we can multiply. Remember that we multiply numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator, and when we have our product, we have to look to see if it can be turned into a mixed number or a whole number. And we also need to make sure that we can simplify, or if we need to simplify, that we do.